Broil, the one topic politically I always avoided because I recognize it's too personal for me. You know, I'm like, and I question what my ability to remain objective as hard as I may try. I'm like, I don't want to touch it, and I know that when I hear people who are just mindless about it, I start getting angry at them. If they're friends, I'm like, what is wrong with you? How do you not see this?
Joe, just so everybody knows, we're live now, Joe.
That's okay. That's all right.
Yeah, I thought, you know what? I love just coming into it because we're talking about it. We're going to talk about this in the show, okay? Mm-hmm. Our timelines have been, shall we say, decorated by non-friends of Robert Barnes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's there's a few things to the dynamic of the interwebs. It's not real life, and the discussions are not engaged with or waged with the same strategy tactics as in real life. That being said, like Cernovich and I and Robert talked about it, blocking people on Twitter. I don't do it as a rule. Other people do it, and they have no problem with it. And it's everyone's prerogative. Online is free speech does not mean free speech on someone's wall, but yeah, it's gone off the deep end over the last couple of days.
I'm sorry. You go ahead, Nate.
Just can somebody give me just the backstory? Is this the guy he was debating? Is that the person he blocked? Like, what the hell's going on?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Who wants to give the backdrop?
Robert Barnes set up a great debate with Nick Fuentes that was hosted by AJ, the name we shall not say. And it was on the Israeli-Palestinian situation, essentially whether Israel even had a right to exist. That kind of did go into it. And it was about 2.5 hours. You know, I didn't make it through all of it. I apologize, but it was good. You know, a lot of facts, back forth. Very respectful debate. Everybody is really respectful to each other. That was one thing that was really cool. Then the following day, there was some back and forth on Twitter. I know Nick Fuentes released a supercut of Barnes saying Islamo-fascists a lot. And in fairness, he did have material to grab for the supercut. But essentially, it was like a 4 or 5 minute cut of just Islamo-fascism, over and over, you know, and that's what it was. I don't know if that was first, but then I know Barnes said that you would probably understand the debate better if you played Nick's parts with German subtitles, and then Barnes blocked him. And that kind of set some things off like crazy. And I didn't know this until later on because I was, you know, getting ready for my stream with Allison, the News with Booze, and David was signing off with Sidebar and talking about, the chat a little bit saucy tonight, a little bit spicy. And I was like, yeah, what? And then when we came on, and I had Barnes on the show on News with Booze, we had company. The chat got very busy.
You're muted. You muted yourself.
Yeah. No, I know I'm muted. I was just listening to the story.
No,
not you.
I'm sitting here talking like a mime. To explain the difference, Eric got what we call ratioed in the industry because people went to Twitter and said, let's go ratio him. I didn't get ratioed. I don't care about that whatsoever. The chat was lively, but the chat was about an issue that we weren't discussing during the live stream. It was with Amanda Milius. But Eric, you guys talked about it, and Barnes went off again. No, I went off.
Right.
Barnes, you guys.
And then they pulled they pulled a quote from it, as a matter of fact. And
where Barnes was talking about Joe Neerman. Oh, Good Lawgic.
Right. And then and they explicitly actually did call for the ratio, which I thought was very, very.
Oh, did they?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, on mine, yeah. Somebody's looking to be ratioed with a link to the show. So, shockingly,
you're dealing with this underage crowd, which like they think that ratio is like has some sort of meaningful significance and don't realize that once you get, I don't know, past 25, 30, that's not the sort of thing you actually really care about. I'm not going to kid you.
That
I didn't
folks,
realize
is
I
what
was
you
putting
call
myself into the
a
fire.
ratio.
Well, no, here's the thing. Ratio, what organic ratio, I would say disorganic ratio. Ratio means something. It means that, the message that was being conveyed is not widely accepted. So when someone puts out a tweet like, I forget who it was the BLM activist after the shooting of the girl with the knife, saying, kids once upon a time used to fight, and that sometimes involved knife fights. When a tweet like that gets ratioed, it's a good indication that people disagree with it. Here,
right? There's no thumbs down. It's an indication
that, but here, when it's someone calling for a ratio, it's an indication that a base who supports an individual are mobilizing to express their discontent. That's the interweb.
Yeah. And I did respond to some of the people who commented, the ones who commented respectfully, the one on because you might not realize this, Nate might not catch this part of the story. I created a video which basically was a takeoff of the phrase "down goes Fraser" with "down goes Fuentes" and a picture of two boxers with Robert Burns like landing one on Nick, and I explained why it is that I thought that Robert soundly defeated Nick. And in the video I made, in fairness to myself, I was very respectful to all parties, and I credited Nick with coming out there and both sides being armed with a wealth of knowledge and facts and information. And I said, throughout the course of the debate, it did become clear that Nick he doesn't like Jews. He just really doesn't like them. And
Robert shared that, by the way, on the show with me too, so that got some traffic your way too,
right?
And Barnes has reshared that a few times, so it's helped you, mean, in terms of discovery.
My normal look. I'm a very small channel, especially compared to any of you guys. I'm a very small channel. My stuff will get 300 views, and this one got so far 3,500 views. I'll get like 10 comments underneath, and this one has 630. And the ones who are respectful and made a point, I would respond to. The ones who are coming out there with a name which sounds like I really don't like Jews, so I didn't respond to. And what I'll tell you, I agree with what Viva just said as far as ratio having relevance in some portions. But in my comments, someone was talking about, hey, the point to a debate is to convince people. All the polling shows that Barnes lost. So why can't you admit that Barnes lost the debate? And my response was basically, look, if Nick Fuentes went out and debated AOC or LeBron James on anything, I assume that Nick Fuentes would win that because he's just much smarter than either of them are. But since AOC and LeBron have massive followings, I would expect that in a poll afterwards, Nick would probably get crushed. So that wouldn't change my mind as to who won that debate. So too over here, you can't say that the numbers, just because he has an army that's mobilizing, it's really not reflective of any sort of who was more compelling in the arguments that they made, and they actually conceded that to their credit.
But Good Lawgic, though, it's kind of like a catch-22, because to be successful in the debate, you got to convince the audience. But if the audience mostly is backing one candidate, then the person who's going into that debate without that audience is at a disadvantage, especially afterwards. So
you're correct.
Like I personally, when I look at the debate, my opinion about who won the debate is one thing. But if just the aggregate of everybody who watched it, if they believe somebody else won the debate, then obviously that I think matters in that sense. Or no,
I understand what you're saying. When you're debating, there's certain people that neither side is going to be able to convince because they're starting entrenched in a camp. And that's what I'm saying is if the size of one camp is far outweighing the size of the vocality and the aggressiveness of one camp is far stronger than the other side. Well, so the numbers are never going to be accurate. And your target market is really people who don't have a lot of information and are really open to either side. And that's the question when I'm addressing who won the debate. Like, of those people who are actually have a mind that can be changed, who was likely more successful? That's my point.
Yeah, I would add two caveats to that. The LeBron James, who was the other one, AOC analogy might fail because on Twitter, at the very least, Barnes and Fuentes I think Barnes has a bigger following, but no question it's not as active a following as Fuentes. But yeah, these polls, it reflected the fact that the people on Twitter who were paying attention to it thought Fuentes won, or they are Fuentes supporters and they're more active. It's worth what it's worth. I think, bottom line, the debate was interesting. I would say on the substance, and why I'll say I think Barnes won the debate, is because they were debating two separate things. Barnes was debating the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and Nick was bringing it back to American policy, dual citizenship among representatives in the U.S. and the U.S. policy internally, and not the actual origins and history of the conflict. So I think they were arguing two separate things to some extent. And Nick did fine. And I think a lot of people see Nick as a 20-year-old kid going in against Barnes, the constitutional, big brain, and he did okay. And in some sense, if I play basketball, someone who's, LeBron James, if I score a point, I'll have done exponentially better than anyone would have expected me to do. So I think
I agree with that.
It was sort of to some extent, Barnes didn't have much to win by this debate, but everyone got their ideas out there, and it'll convince people or it won't. It won't convince Nick's followers. Barnes will not convince Nick's followers, probably, maybe a few of them, and nor will Nick convince Barnes' followers, maybe a few. But by and large, they got their ideas out there. It's up to the general public now just to assess them and forget assessing their underlying intentions. Just assess their outright arguments.
I think it's amazing that they had this debate, and I wish that we would have tons of debates like this on a myriad of topics. I think this is what the First Amendment is all about. That's the point, is that we should hear both sides of the argument and flesh it out. So especially on things that we're not entrenched on a position, that Americans have an opportunity to decide. And that's why I credited all three of them. And AJ did a phenomenal job, I thought, in the way he conducted himself and handled the whole thing. I thought all three of them really handled it well. I was disappointed that the reaction afterwards made it seem as if this is not something that's ever going to happen again, because it became heated. It became a pissing match when it wasn't. During the course of the debate, it was not at all a pissing match, and afterwards it seemed like it did become that, and that's unfortunate.
Also, that's, in fairness, it's not necessarily Nick and Barnes that are at it. I'm not going to blame Nick. I'm not going to blame Barnes. It's their fan. It's like, yeah, they really acted fine toward each other. Yeah, Barnes did block him, but I don't want to just lay a brush on Nick and say that Nick did everything. I don't know of any specifically disrespectful thing that Nick has said. In fairness, during the debate or even after the debate, he did the supercut, but that's perfectly fine to me. That was their game, man. That was making a joke of Barnes, saying the same thing over and over.
One thing I do want to say about I don't know who Nick is. I don't even know who this guy is. But one thing about Barnes, I disagree with Barnes vehemently on points. And Barnes has never once even gotten upset about it, right? We always talk about the issues. And I've gone after Barnes like, yo, he's just wrong on this. So for him to block somebody, something had to happen that's out of the ordinary, because Barnes has an incredibly thick skin. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it is. I think it's similar to what happened in the MXR plays thing. Like the fans react with a little more vigor than the leaders, and sometimes the leaders are surprised that their fans and their subs react the way they did. And like MXR plays never said anyone should go after Juke and Media and send them death threats and dox their families, but some very proactive MXR plays fans did that. I don't know what happened, but bottom line, getting blocked on Twitter is not the biggest deal either. I mean, yeah, if I get blocked, I do wear it as something of a badge of armor. I'm sure Nick will as well. I'm sure Barnes has his reasons, but why things fall off the cliff on Twitter, it's the nature of Twitter. You go from a 2.5-hour nuanced debate where people have 5 minutes to explain their ideas. Then you go to 140 characters where what sells on Twitter is the sass, is the snark, is the mockery, and is the name calling. So it's obvious that that's what happens.
Yeah. And my reaction, actually, I did at the beginning of my live stream last night, where I basically was, talking about how upset and the internet hates me. And then I just exploded in laughter. Because like the goal, as if the goal was to I don't know, chase me off of channel or something, and I just exploded in laughter. And I was like, the point to what we are doing right now, what all four of us do, is we want to make people think, feel, react. And if that's how you're being successful, and whether it's through humor, through something that's insightful or something that's informative, whatever it is, that if you've reached that, if I touched a button, that is what I wanted to do. And look, hopefully you like me, but if you don't, there's no such thing as bad PR. There really isn't, because my goal is I just want to make you feel. We all want to make you feel. So since we just want to make you feel, if I'm successful in that regard, even if I made you angry at me, that means I'm actually getting a message out there that has significance.
But
there's actually a lesson in that.
Agree with that.
Go ahead, Nick.
No, I just said I just agree with that in the sense I don't want to make people feel. I want to make people think. Like my channel is about, and what I do is like, think about this. Does this work? Is this smart? Is this how would you think about it if you thought about it this way? And if you think about it, now your feelings to me don't matter. But if you if you have the correct law and the correct standard, then you can derive an opinion. So I don't want to manipulate people's emotions. I'd rather try to just force them to think about it from a different perspective.
No, okay, I understand what you're saying, and obviously, when political and legal commentary, the thought is behind it, but the thought is going to often translate into an emotional reaction. When someone even hears something from you, think about this for a second, Nate. When someone hears you explain about proper use of force or something, they have a certain feeling of like, wow, I really understand that better. There's an intellectual process that you're generating, and that intellectual process makes them feel more informed and feel better about themselves, even though it's your primary target there is their brain. And when every video I make, the primary target there is to make people think. But that thought is almost always, invariably, it's going to translate into some sort of emotion within the listeners if they're actually tuned into what I'm saying. Do you see what I'm saying? That as far as how it's really both, even when you're going for someone's thought process, it's also on a certain level making them feel good about themselves, that they understand something better, or enjoying what you're saying and appreciating their understanding.
There are two levels to that. And okay, first off, I wanted to get back to the first thing you said about, the views and no publicity is bad publicity, all that stuff. I have to admit, looking at it, one, it didn't bother me a lot because it was so funny and so far out of my control. It's like, okay, well, everybody's going to hate it. Let's see where it goes here. Is it 40%? Is it 50%? Where's it going to end up? But then, every one of these is a view, and there's a view and a view and a view, and they're adding up. And it kind of gives me something to think about. I'm like, I can see where people get addicted to that, and they're saying, look at the views I got on this. This is more than double the views for my standard news with booze. Let's see if I can pick a fight with somebody. And I can see where you can go down a pretty ugly path. And I think that might be what Nate is worrying about there too. And then as far as the other part with the emotion, well, sometimes you have to draw somebody in by emotion in order to get a message to resonate to their heart. I mean, don't preachers do that? Rabbis do that? Don't others do that? Like, tell a story that has an impact on people so they feel for that character, and then the underlying message can be delivered more.
That's true. That's true.
Eric, first of all, I'm an idiot. I pull out my stupid plug to my camera because I'm just not thinking about what I'm doing. Danny Chaos, can you pull up Danny Chaos' super chat?
Oh, yeah.
Farron, I watched the debate. I think it was a no contest, but Barnes stepped into the debate when the other person was unavailable with the fallout. Could this call into question Barnes' integrity? First of all, don't do another super chat, but Danny, do you mean no contest Nick, or do you mean no contest Barnes? First question. Second, just to the comment at the end, will this call into call into question Barnes' integrity? This is the thought process of social media and political discourse at large these days, where if you disagree with something, one thing somebody did, and you otherwise respect that person, all of a sudden that person becomes suspect as an individual, as a historical entity, like Dershowitz, smartest legal scholar, widely recognized. The second he defends Trump, everything he's ever done in his life becomes suspect, gets uninvited, disinvited, whatever. You can disagree with something someone did and still respect a ton of things the other did. For it to be disqualifying, it has to be a little more material than blocking someone on Twitter. It has to be a little more material than being sassy after a debate. But it has to be something big. This. First of all, I don't even think blocking someone. People have reasons to do it, and they might have reasons that nobody will ever know, and they might have motivations that they can't talk about. About the debate was fine. And very few people would have actually sat down with Nick in the first place to do it. And I think it was an interesting discussion, but nothing in there could, in my mind, cause me to question Barnes' integrity. But I see everyone doing it now. People send me messages saying, I never want to see locals again, yada, yada, yada. If this is what it takes to turn you off with someone in their entire entity, you're never there in the first place.
I've lost all respect for Barnes. I followed Viva and Barnes for 2 years. There's a lot. And it's like, wow. So that's 2 years. A guy said something or whatever has to me you like, and that's it? I guess you aren't a devoted fan or follower.
Well, you
You're
know
not
what though?
asking a question.
I get that a lot. I get a lot of people who believe that I'm one way, and then I'll lose.
Well, you
Like,
deserve that. No, I'm just
like
kidding.
I lose 300 fans. No, it always happens, and it's because people want to be in echo chambers. And like even with Viva's analogy about Robert Dershowitz, Alan Dershowitz, to say, Alan has defended neo Nazis before, and he has had no problems with that. But he defends Trump, and there's a problem with that. So I don't think it's, some people have their anchor. Hey, if you say something bad about this or I dislike this, I'm just not going to follow you anymore. But I think it's just because people just don't have thick skins. I think with Barnes is an academic, and he's going to give you the cold hard truth as he understands it. And I think just a lot of people just can't accept that cold hard truth. A lot of people want you to lie to them. They don't want to hear the truth, and that's a shame.
By the way, on schedule, we are yellow.
It's good.
We
Man,
haven't even said anything. We haven't said anything.
Request the review.
And you know what? They have gotten so ridiculous on their new system now. Like they're going back 90 days, and they're no longer considering when YouTube gets it wrong. It's just atrocious. And by the way, Danny Chaos meant no contest, as in no winner, not no contest, as in one person hands down.
Which is fair. I think there were points made on both sides that are very solid, and they weren't always addressed with each other. And that I do think, and I think Joe did a good job bringing that up in yours, that some of Nick's points Barnes didn't necessarily address directly.
Yeah, and I thought a lot of Nick's points, and this is where you can say, why did I come to a conclusion that he doesn't like Jews? Because a lot of his points was about Judaism. And the implication was his whole platform. His whole platform was America first. All we should care about is America. And if we're just caring about America, why are we sending money to anyone? Palestinian, Muslim, Jewish? Why are we sending it to Israel, Palestine? Why are we sending it to anyone? And that's a very reasonable question. I love that question. I had that question myself. But really, is what it boils down to. So, what it boils down to is America first? Does that mean isolationism, or does America first really mean that we do need to have an investment out there in the world to maintain a role as sort of world policemen? And my perspective is, it's better to use our dollars than our soldiers. I don't want people marching out into Afghanistan or other countries, or Iraq or Iran next. So that was my perspective. But when he starts boiling it down and saying that, and this is what he thinks is part of his argument, he's like, well, look what Jews think of Jesus compared to what Muslims think of Jesus. How is that relevant to an American first policy? That's not relevant. That's just like, I like this religion. I prefer religion A over religion B. And that's, once you're bringing that into the equation, the implication is, well, if Israel is run by Christians, then of course we should be sending our money there. And that is what makes it into, from my perspective, that his whole perspective is being skewed by his dislike or distrust of Jews. And
at least, and you're inferring that. So I
that's
guess
what I draw from the point that he's making
from his verbiage that is being said.
It's not just his verbiage; it's the fact that he thinks that this is a relevant argument. Like, why is what Jews think about Christians remotely relevant to what we're doing, to whether or not we should invest in Israel as a spear against the tip of potential danger? That whether they're Jewish, whether they're Buddhist, who cares? They're a tip against the spear. Why are you fixating and creating a false argument about what Jewish ideology is? Because he has it completely wrong as far as what Jewish ideology is. But I don't want to get into that. That's boring. But the point is, that's not an element that's part of the argument. And since not, unless your fixation is religious rather than political.
I think Nick, during the debate, he admitted and recognized when he said something that would be problematic. And that was when he said that, when Barnes asked him, do you think there would be peace in the Middle East if Israel ceased to exist? And his answer was effectively yes, and I'm going to get in trouble for that. So
Nate, you're getting me in trouble.
What happened?
I am not removing Nate. Nate is having technical issues.
Yeah. I'm sorry, guys. I got bad internet today.
But that's where the position of Nick becomes one that people can easily take issue with. First of all, I think it's historically naive to suggest that there would be peace in the Middle East if Israel ceased to exist. But that is the line of reasoning, and that is arguments that are raised by people and groups. And so, and Nick knew when he said it. You know, he immediately caught himself and said, "Well, I'm probably going to get in trouble for that." But that's a problematic element of the discussion that I think other people might have taken issue with.
Does this person know about Iran and Iraq, the Sunni versus Shia? Does he know anything? Because that statement's an ignorant statement for anyone who knows anything about the Middle East, right? You know, there's never been peace there because it's in Islam. There's never been a big. Go ahead.
I think the bigger issue is there's never been peace on Earth, and to promote the idea that if you eliminate one nation, whichever nation it is, that magically there will be no infighting among the remaining nations. It's fundamentally incongruous with the history of humankind. You had fighting among Africa. I mean, in Rwanda, you had fighting among the same population because they will still find distinctions within a population to fight over. So that was the problematic thing. I think some people might.
Viva, my objection. I think you're thinking about it too broadly. Between the Shia, I believe I'm saying it wrong. The Shiites and the Sunnis for Muslims, Iran, for instance, and Iraq, they went through the war. Remember the whole Iran-Iraq war? You have the war against Iran and Saudi Arabia, how they hate each other, and they have the proxy war in Yemen. So this is not like remove Israel and everything is daffodils.
No, but
they have real issues. They have wars between Muslims there. So Israel is a piece of it, but it's not the key piece to it.
But Nick Fuentes' response to that would be like, I don't care about that. Let them kill each other. I don't care. All I care about is America and whether or not, if they're killing each other, why would I care? And I'll tell you something. As an American, I deeply, that resonates. Like, that's not our job to go out there and fix a fight between, China and Taiwan. Unless it's something that can spill over into American life. And that's what he would say is if Shiites are killing Sunnis, who cares? But the point is that Robert Barnes was making, and this, in retrospect, afterwards, I was thinking about, I was like, he really could have made the point that isolationism, the last time America announced we're isolationists, the result was, it was pre-World War II, really.
Yeah,
and
World War II.
Yeah, and that's, no, I'm saying that's not,
said we were.
You're right, but that was not the most recent. More recently was after World War I, we said we're never going to engage in stuff like that again. And that emboldened fascists to basically say, well, we don't have to worry about America being involved here. And that that's what ended up leading to America having to send hundreds of thousands of troops and lose 550,000 soldiers in Europe. So that policy doesn't seem sound to anyone who ever looks at, history at all and says, well, what will the natural ramifications be? And that's why, to me, this is all, it's a political argument. It should never devolve into a religious argument. And we need to understand Nick's argument in order to present it fairly. And it boils down to, is isolationism a healthy perspective? Is America first? Is that the best thing for America, isolationism, or is it not? That's really what this whole thing boils down to at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting thing in terms of what isolationism even means. Like, everyone say isolation in as much as possible, in as much as there's no direct threat. But then the flip side is you start interpreting direct threat to be threats on financial, economic, energy interests, threats on allies, and then you go from isolationism to any attack on any interest or any of our, something that can influence us economically becomes an attack on the nation, and then you end up in wars in countries that you have no business being in.
And I want to be 100% clear. If I could just finish one thought, because I'm afraid I'm going to forget to mention this. I am very against sending our troops out. That when I'm talking about being involved in world politics, I wish we could take every troop that's across our shores and bring them back home. I don't like that role playing world police. That's why I'd much rather use our financial. I would use American financial resources than send out American boys into harm's way. So
a lot of these problems started pre-World War. Well, around World War I time frame. You can put them back to Churchill and the British map makers. I mean, a lot of the Middle East problems came from that. It's like, okay, let's draw this up. Yeah, some good natural barriers. So that's a country. Boom, let's draw this up. That's a country. Half of the problems are our inserting ourselves, the U.S. and the West, into their business. So I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. Like, we're not an isolationist. If you hit us, we're obviously going to hit back and hard, but we don't have to go try to build their country. We don't have to go manipulate their currency, manipulate the government or anything else. So we kind of, you don't have to be all of one or all the other.
Well,
That's
but
true.
Sorry, Nate.
let's the realistic piece of it is like the world is like a ship, and we want to be the ones with our hands on the wheel, directing the ship. And to do that, you got to get involved. You got to get involved in this. Give these people money. Let's have these allies. You know, if the Middle East says we're not sending out any more oil, that's going to affect everyday American lives. So I think at the end of the day, if you just think about the geopolitical spectrum, you want to be in control, but then where does that stop? You know, and I think with great power becomes great responsibility. So the more you have, the more control you want. And I think the United States now has to have that balance as the only superpower in the world with the money and the military might to beat anybody on the planet. How much influence do you control? Because at the end of the day, all these different players can make a difference in the United States. And I think Viva's right on, because when you talk about threat assessments, that's about future. That's about, what will happen. And if you can, change the odds in your favor with the political might and the strength to do it, then I understand why the United States does it. I support that, but I support you doing it in a responsible way. Now, is it Trump's response, the way Trump does it or the way Biden does it? I think that's all up to the people to decide who they want in there.
I hate it when we get too picky on it, though, because we have a tendency to attach strings to our support. Like, if you think this way, we'll give you a little bit more than this way. It gets really, really complex. And then you wind up pissing off the next person because you're helping the first person. We could obviously help lead the world and be very humanitarian oriented and say, look, you had a flood, you had this problem, you had that, and lead the way, giving money, giving support, giving food, giving some technology to help grow food. There's a lot of things we could do that have nothing to do with political leaning or anything else, and still be seen as a leader, leading by example.
But Eric,
versus the direct manipulation.
But you don't support, like the United States has a policy, they don't give money to dictators, right, or dictatorships, right? I support that policy, right? I'd rather you give it.
Yeah, but that's bullshit policy. We do it all the time.
But I'm not saying we don't on a pervert end. But what I'm saying is that as a policy, if we followed that policy, that's a political policy that I would agree with, right? We shouldn't give money to dictators. So I think, but like you're saying, maybe they don't, maybe they do, that type of thing. But I think there are some political stances that we can use our money for to support other than other ones.
But here's an example. If you could find a way to directly help the North Korean people without it getting to the government, I'm just curious, would you be interested in that? Like in a way to control where the government themselves could not have it directly, but these 7 million hostages or whatever it is, but could get a little bit of support.
You would always have the problem, though, is that all right, let me hear your idea, because maybe you is, because there's like this fundamental problem with governments is that they have that link to the people. So whatever wealth you give to the people eventually is going to end up with the government, because the government is really just the people.
Someone on our locals community during one of the AMAs, which you can get at vivabarneslaw.locals.com, asked me, would I support, would I understand or would I support foreign countries issuing sanctions on the Canadian government for what other people and some people rightly or perceive to be abuse of human rights, arresting pastors for holding service, curfews. In Quebec, just reported on the news this morning that they issued 21,000 fines. Health order fine since January 1st, with something like $31 million. So someone's saying, do you support sanctions on Canada for the abuse of human rights? I was like, now that you asked me the question and now that I'm in it, who would that punish except for the people? Who does sanction? The government is not going to take a pay cut. The government's not going to, have to work harder for food. It's only going to punish the people. And now you realize how these sanctions on foreign countries to punish dictatorship governments doesn't punish the governments one iota, and it just punishes the people. So the question is, what do you do? At some point, you might have to acknowledge and recognize that you can't go and save the North Korean people, or you can't do it.
That's true. I'm just throwing out the craziest. I think that's the one country left maybe that will almost 100% universally agree has a problem with a pretty bad dictator.
Well,
whether you're left or right or email. Everybody agree North Korea, not a good place, not fun. Don't want to send your kids.
Can I mention the fact that I do agree with you, Viva, that sanctions just hurt the people. But from my understanding, and maybe it might just be rudimentary because again, I'm not a political science major, but it may be that is the idea, right? The idea, if your idea is to have a political change, then you want to hurt the people with the power to make that political change. The people, for instance, I think North Korea, they're just so suppressed that they can't uprise against the government. But that's essentially what you want to do. You don't want, the sanctions. You don't want to hurt Vladimir Putin. You want to hurt the people and his support system so you can get that underground. Hey, we want to get out these sanctions. It was happening in Iran. The sanctions are
It's kind of like chemotherapy
to make that political change.
It's kind of like chemotherapy, Nate. If you're using that argument, it's like you're in a way you're poisoning the host, hoping that the disease dies first.
Well, I think that it works sort of when you want to compel, you want to push people to do something. You could use a carrot or a stick, and when you're marketing, you could target market like a child's product. So you could target market the parents, or you could target market the child. When you target market the child, so you're trying to get the child to basically act upon the parent enough that the parent will respond and buy the product that you're pitching, which is, I think, what sanctions basically are. It's a stick that's aimed at the child in this analogy. So if we give a stick against the people, they will get angry enough at the parent, the government, that they will force change. Now, that doesn't work in North Korea where you have a dictator, but in a place where you have an elected government, in theory, that is the logic behind sanctions to me, that if we punish the people enough, they'll vote their leader out.
Well, you want to know where it worked? It worked here in the United States, when China did it to the farmers here in the Midwest, right? And they had that big Democratic surge where every time it was a 50-50, then they voted Democrat. And that was because the Chinese did sanctions and said, we're going to target the pork market, we're going to target these particular markets, and then the farmers were like, oh my God, we can't sell to China, they've targeted us, and then Trump had to kind of bail them out, and that forced the political change, right? That midterm election was a huge swing for the Democrats. Now people will say it's for all these other things, but China did that to hurt Trump. And remember, they only targeted the markets that they knew were pro-Trump, and those are the ones that felt the most pain. So I think we all do it, but I think how effective it is that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, I agree. And here's from the chat, though, to the rescue, which I agree. The whole problem with dictators, etc., is there are some areas of the world that, let's just say that when you remove the dictator, what's underneath can be a little more than everybody's ready to handle. See ISIS, see Libya, where there are open slave markets now. We're arguing about 1619 slavery and everything. You can argue today there's open slave markets currently in Libya, failed state. Gaddafi, not a great guy, but he was also flipping and turning a whole lot of evidence over to the CIA and everything else. I have talked to CIA people and confirmed that he was playing ball. He got pulled out. Look at Libya. It's a mess. So
it's a mess. It's a mess. And then what is the obligation of the international community as relates to Libya? Then what's the obligation of individual nations as relates to Libya, North Korea, China, what they're doing to the Uyghurs? I'm going to mispronounce it. The Uyghurs. First of all, what's the obligation? I know everybody has an idealized sense of morality. What's the obligation for Canada and the U.S. to start, fighting Libya, North Korea, China, when they have homeless people in the United States? They have tremendous problems in the United States, and by doing it, it's great. On the one hand, it creates business for the industrial complex to make weapons to sell to people so that they can use them, and then you can finance
the enemies. That was one of Barnes's arguments, I think, which was interesting. Because I brought up the fact that Israel has far more social programs, for example, than the United States. And by giving them a few $1 billion a year, are we in fact funding their social programs that could be considered pulled away from our own? And it's a question.
It's a question. The answer would be, the billions of dollars that the U.S. gives Israel in military aid comes back to America, but goes to certain companies because. So I mean that's it. It's like it's great. It sounds like you're giving billions in aid to Israel and it's never coming back, but it comes back to America. It just goes into the hands of somebody else, which is part and parcel of a bigger problem, which is not just Eisenhower. Sorry?
Yeah, it brings us back to Eisenhower, the military-industrial complex.
Yeah, and it's like
that's a whole nother.
You can understand how people can take issue with that. It's on the one hand, it's not even going to social programs to the betterment of the people of another. It goes there. They give it right back to the country to buy weapons from America. And who owns those companies? And then once you realize that this is how the I call it, it's basically like tax money laundering. When you realize that this is how it happens, you have a problem with foreign intervention because, first of all, it's a war that's never meant to be won. It's a war that's just meant to be perpetual. And it's a big problem. But then you end up, arguably being labeled heartless and you don't care about the international community. But when I hear Trudeau talking about sending tens of millions of dollars to developing nations, when we have our very serious problems with First Nations in Canada and homeless people and kids, 1 out of 5 kids basically being, not getting enough food, living in poverty. Hey, Dr. Hill,
got lots of money. You got a $13 million marketing budget.
Oh yeah, and where does that go?
Alone.
Where does that? Anyone ever stop to think where that goes? $13 million taxpayers goes to advertising. It goes to the radio stations and it goes to the marketing companies that are producing these commercials. I guarantee you, I can surmise the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon as to who that money goes to. It is taxpayer money laundering.
Well, hold on. I think I still think the point about Israel is valid. I think the question is valid in the sense of we are, they pass a law. $60 billion in whatever to Israel, right? Israel gets that money, and then we tell them who to buy it from. You go to Boeing and buy your stuff. You go there, right? You're buying from America. You can only use those dollars with our guys. That's why they're outfitted with all American stuff. But it's not like Israel is sending us $60 billion. What I'm saying is that Israel would have to spend that. They're going to spend that money on an Iron Dome because they're still going to be sending rockets. They're still going to need weapons. They're going to still need that stuff. So if we weren't giving it to them, they would have to either raise taxes or do something else. So the fact that we do give them this money lets them spend that money that they were going to spend on those weapons on other things like these social programs. So we are, so in a way, we are funding those social programs directly, I believe, because they would have to spend that money on something like that anyway. But Israel's not the only one because we send that money to Saudi Arabia. We send that money.
Oh, I agree. That's my gripe. That is my gripe. Like, I don't think we can afford national health care, but maybe we could if we weren't. I mean, we spend more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. And half the stuff we're buying, like, how many aircraft carriers do we need? How many tanks do we need? We're still buying tanks, for God's sake.
I do want to say this before I get canceled. I agree with actually sending these weapons and things to places that need them. But I do think the question is still valid. We are subsidizing these social programs, even though it's a 2-step process.
No, okay. I don't. There's nothing susceptible of cancellation here. This is just how it actually works. It's sort of like the
you never know.
Well, no, it's sort of like the argument that was raised in the commandeering tax. The rollout of the COVID aid to certain states, where they're saying, okay, you're going to give us federal aid for COVID. We're going to lower state taxes, and so you are able to lower the state taxes if you're getting aid. It's the same thing conceptually internationally. But the question is just also if you're simultaneously doing this with 2 simultaneously feuding enemies, and I'm not just talking Israel, Palestine, I'm talking like other countries. You're simultaneously funding 2 entities that are fighting each other. It's good for business, but it's not good for peace. And so it's great. Keep doing it and just hope that the conflict stays over there. And then you only really have the poop hits the fan when the conflict spills over to the country that has been financing both enemies in a war against each other.
Yeah, it's blood money. Anyway, I've got some super chats I want to get in here. Complete tangent. I don't know anything about this. The USA top hat lawyer doing anything on the Dalai Lama / nun marital support lawsuit?
I know.
Oh, top hat, that's you.
0. I know. How do I even do 0 now without getting accused of something? I know 9? 0 about this lawsuit.
Me either. I never heard of it.
Yeah, 0, nothing.
Yeah, okay. I wanted to get that out there. Let me see. Scott Adams talked about working with BLM. Who he was working with was reasonable, but in public, he had to be a radical or more radical person would topple him. It's the 1-up feature in humans. I can see that. That's kind of annoying. I don't agree with the behavior, but I understand that it exists. What do you guys think?
I actually was reading about this topic on my stream. There was a thread that I had retweeted, which had a list of different quotes, and one of them was the idea that when you have a group that's together and they are otherizing an individual, so there is a psychological, they actually call it, I think, the group monkey dance, where if they're otherizing and torturing someone, there becomes almost a badge of honor as far as being the most aggressive and cruelest person. You will earn the most respect by taking that role on, and it sends a message to the others not to follow the group. So I think that whole public persona of everyone has to see me as being the most vocal and crazy person of this group, that's what reestablishes psychologically in the minds of the group that yes, this is the appropriate leader. So I can understand someone saying having a public persona is very different from who they are in real life, because keeping that up 24/7, it's hard. It's a hard thing to do. But when you're just going out in public and you have this is your public persona, this is your image. So
I understand, but that's repugnant to me, because I believe in one thing I could say from, as well as I know all of you guys, when the camera stops and I'm talking to you,
we're the same.
Or when we're not recording, yeah, I don't know any difference. And it really, really deeply bothers me when I come across somebody who is putting something on. It just, and that's my own personal thing.
That's because you have character. That's why you have character. If you have genuine character, then that sort of duality where it's like you're fake. You're just completely fake person.
Like Larry the Cable Guy or something, which I don't find funny personally, but I understand that is a role or an actual character. Andrew Dice Clay going another way. I get it. That's literally a fake persona. Okay, but I don't know. I just really have trouble. And I understand we're all going to amp it up a little bit. Like, when we're not talking here, we're a little bit more laid back.
I amp it down when I go online. If I think people saw me in real life, they would think I'm even crazier than they think I am now.
Okay.
It's a funny thing. Like, I hope that I am the same person on and offline, and it's a question on the one hand of character, but also on neuroses. I don't want anybody saying, "Man, I ran into Freiheit the other day, and he's a real a-hole." Compared to that would be one of those soul crushing things where I would feel bad if someone actually got that impression after having met me in person.
So I want to point out about recently I try to find videos for my stream that I'll just sort of incorporate that I think are interesting or funny, and I came across something, and this is relevant to what Viva was talking about as far as how he amps it down, and it talks about ratios, because I was looking at the numbers of this, and it boggled my mind. So if you could just, I don't know if you can Google, or I actually think I might have the link here that I'm going to share with you privately, Eric. So this is a video that I don't think was properly ratioed. I think it's called Gangnam Businessman.
Okay.
Right, hang on.
I remember that one. That was me running a race with my best buddy dressed up in suits doing Gangnam.
And I was like, this thing has 14,000 views and only 83 likes. And I couldn't believe it. I don't know if you could share.
If anybody's watching right now, go and look up Wrecking Spartan, like Wrecking Ball. Oh. Well, this one was one of my favorites to make, but
I appreciate it, and I want you to know something. I appreciate how much effort there was, because now that I've started doing video editing, it must have been so hard to sync up the words with the music and take this clip and that clip and this clip and that clip. It must have taken you dozens of hours.
So everybody can enjoy this fully.
Skip, you might want to skip 30 seconds into this one because the lyrics don't start for a few seconds. This was back in the day.
Gangnam Style.
Yeah, but it's playing the music.
I'm watching Young David.
No, but you don't want to get a copyright strike for the music.
You might get a strike for this, Eric.
Oh, God,
Put the volume down.
Yeah.
This one presented specific challenges because the song wasn't in English. At the very least, I found out the song wasn't in English when I started trying to look up the lyrics. But everyone watching, go put in Wrecking Spartan, like Wrecking Ball with the Spartan, and you'll see this video. The way I did these things back when we had freedom in life, I would go with my iPhone, put my iPhone in a Ziploc bag, put it in my Camelback for the race, and just play the song on loop throughout the entire race. And so at any given point in time, I'd start recording and I could lip sync because I hear the music in my backpack. The only thing is doing a 2.5-hour race to Wrecking Ball. And I was racing, I was still doing a good pace with this. I was racing with the same people throughout the entire race. They said at the end, like, dude, if I hear Wrecking Ball one more time on loop, I will kill you during the race. This one is cringe at times 10. That's my old office.
Wow.
You didn't have to say it out loud, though.
Isn't that great?
Did you ever think of that?
Isn't that great?
Same dude.
I did a bunch of these. This is what I used to do. Oddly enough, Joe, it took like 3 hours to do the race, but it took 5 hours to do the editing. And I got it to a point where I remembered where the sections where I could do it relatively easily. I was using Windows Movie Maker, and the most terrible thing was Movie Maker crashes every 20 minutes, regardless of what you're doing. But if I knew then what I knew now.
What do you use now? What do you use now?
Final Cut Pro 10.
Final Cut Pro 10?
Because he's on a Mac, like classy people.
Oh, you can only get that from Mac?
Yeah, they make a PC version, I think, but I'm never. I don't even want to smell a
Premiere.
PC.
Premiere makes Adobe makes Premiere. That's PC, but no.
Hold on, what's that? Drew Bradley says, I wonder if Viva was an American lawyer, if he wouldn't lose every case because he would drive the judge nuts. I slow down in court sometimes. My learning curve was when I was in front of a judge with my old mentor, and I'm talking, and we end, and I was like, I sit down, I feel great. And then my boss like, did you not notice the judge wasn't taking notes? I was like, no. He's like, the judge stopped taking notes after about 2 minutes. That's never a good sign.
Okay, insane. Now, we actually have a legitimate story to cover. It's going to be coming out in the New York Times soon.
Oh yeah,
ish. We have a bit of a celebrity here who eventually is going to be doxxed by the New York Times. So tell us about the case, Nate.
Yeah, so earlier this week, the reporter from the New York Times calls me and says, hey, the story's going to come out this weekend. If there's nothing bigger coming out, because they're trying to put this, what they do, for a lot of people who don't know, is they can these stories and they want to release them at optimal points in time. So they want to release it when they can get the most eyes on it, supposedly. So they told me it should be releasing, I think, either yesterday or today, and if it's not, it should be next week. So what the story is about the Manhattan DA dropped the ball on a serial blankist. Right. And there's multiple women who said that this person did it. They had video of him being drugged. So I was actually representing my client actually intervened in one of these assaults. So I was representing him, and the Manhattan DA charged them. So during my investigation, I found, like, hold on, this guy has it's like all these women who said that this has happened to them, So I turned it over to the Manhattan DA. They sat on it, and it's funny because they let the guy go. It was like it was a horror show. So then, like a year later, the Times, a couple of newspapers got notice of this happening. I think it was the person reported to the school, and it snowballed. So then eventually now the Manhattan DA, he's not running again for a DA. So they don't know if it's because of this story, but the Manhattan DA did admit that this fell through the cracks, and they may have let a serial blankist go. So that's where we're at.
Pretty big win.
Wow.
Yeah, too little, too late. It's
when you said blankist, I had no idea the first time. I was like, did he say blanket?
Yeah. We can't.
I
cannot speak English on this channel.
You know what the iron is? You could say the most offensive things in the world. You're going to get nailed for that clip from the Gangnam Style because
it's your fault.
Yeah. But
make it yellow.
I want to point out, by the way, Eric, Viva, I created for you now. You can make a copyright claim against Eric and for him airing your video, and now you can take Nick's $20 from him.
There you go. Well, no, it's actually more like $14. Thank you very much.
No, people don't necessarily appreciate. YouTube gives you the tools to see who's using your videos and what percentage they're using, and it's an interesting tool. For some of the videos that are being licensed, the licensing agency does that. I don't like those types of interactions, and unless it's egregious, it's publicity nonetheless when people use clips.
All right, hey, I gotta be Barnes, and I gotta get my first plug-in of the day. Unstructured.locals.com. Someday Nate will actually join Locals, and he'll have something.
I've joined all you guys. I've joined you. I've joined Viva. I've got Oren all over group. I'm like in everything.
Good Lawgic. Good Lawgic.locals.
Oh, Good Lawgic is on Locals too?
Good Lawgic.locals.com. I expect to see all of you signed up.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Nate still hasn't gone to Rumble, which is unacceptable, and there's no good reason not to. But what the Helio?
Okay. This was sent to me, and I put it up on Locals, but it's a link to this particular article, and I think it kind of speaks for itself.
The important thing, first thing to look at, date, January 11, 2017.
Uh-huh. Date.
Fauci.
Second most important thing is who said it.
Fauci. The most
Isn't that
trustworthy.
interesting? I don't know what to think of that. I just thought it was a very, very interesting article that
Well,
everybody should see.
I can't see anything. Can you guys read it to me?
It says
Okay,
Fauci
article written by Fauci. So it's not quoting him. It is written by Anthony Fauci. No doubt Trump will face surprise infectious disease outbreak.
The key is the date of this
In
article.
2017, he wrote this. Don't know what to think.
So why is that? Why is that shocking?
Well, it's predicting a disaster from the person who would then be the head of that disaster for the politician who nobody liked at the time 3 years before the disaster happened.
But
So-
but you guys know
By the guy who was funding study in the same lab potentially that it may have escaped.
Well, but you guys do know that like every president since I think Reagan or Reagan, Bush, like all of them have had some serious infectious disease. Like that's it's not a prediction that's like, oh, it's predicting coronavirus, right? Swine flu, the MERS, all those other things. Like every president has had one of these. Even under the Bush administration, Clinton administration, it happens all the time.
It's interesting. Then if that's the retort, my retort would be, did Fauci then say that about every other president beforehand? Like why make, I'd like to read the article. Why make this statement specifically in respect of Trump? It's true. You had swine flu, you had Ebola under Obama, although it was more
If they
localized.
asked me this about the Biden administration, I've never said this about any other, but they said, do you think that it'll have, and I'll say yes, there will probably absolutely be one during the Biden administration. That doesn't mean that I didn't say that about all the other ones. It happens to be true that all the other ones did have a major infectious disease that they had to deal with. Obama had a couple of them, right? Swine flu, Ebola, Bush before him, all of them. So it's not. I don't think the prediction is nefarious. I just think it's just telling a fact of the reality of 2017 when Trump got elected that he's probably going to have to deal with something like this because every other president in our generation has had to deal with one.
So just to break this down, Nate, you're saying that this is not incriminating. This is not an incriminating thing because it's fairly obvious, and Viva is basically questioning, well, was Fauci saying this back under Clinton and Carter and FDR as long as he's been there? Because
even if it's fairly obvious, Nate, why even say it on the one hand? And then if it's fairly obvious and he says it, then the theory here is not, the questions that I would be asking is not, did he go and cause it? The question is, once you're setting up politicizing it, I mean, is this not setting up beforehand, politicizing the inevitable? Oh, he's definitely going to face one. And I would like to see what the rest of the article says. But it's interesting. If it happens every presidency, why even say it? If it's a cyclical thing, why even say it? It sort of lends to the idea that there was this laying the brickwork for politicizing it when it happens.
See,
there are
a lot of layers. There's a lot of political layers out there. I just think if answering the question is showing, hey, we're doing this, we're going into 2017. I think Trump is going to have to deal with one, and maybe just telling people, because most people probably wouldn't have known that. Most people didn't even know that every president in our generation, in our lifetime, has dealt with one of these things, right? So it just may just be saying something. Hey, this is what we expect going forward. I don't know. I don't want to impugn someone's motives or make it more complicated than what it really is. Every president may have to deal with a major hurricane. That's true. It's a true statement. I don't have to say about every other president. I just it's something true.
Okay, well, Anthony Fauci, Nate the lawyer, he's listed in the New York directory.
That's good.
Did they mention anything about mail-in ballots in the 2017 article? I do want to read that article.
That's good.
Wow, you guys are really desperate to see this stream get canned, aren't you?
It's not going to get canned. It just might not get monetized. That's what you have the super chat for. And that's how we can break it down.
It's already yellow. We'll see. So far,
I've been noticing YouTube has been getting, I think, in my experience, getting better at remonetizing. I think I think they might be needing the ad revenue. I was pleasantly surprised. I'm going to post an Epstein highlight this afternoon about the 2 prison guards. Admittedly, we don't use certain words and we don't go, over the top of discussing it. But once upon a time, even the mention would automatically get demonetized, and now it's been green lighted. So, I think they need the ad revenue now, and I think they might get a little more supple on the rules that are not, important to whatever narrative is, critical.
Well, maybe
I kind of think it's because Trump's out. Honestly, I do feel like as time has gone on and there's been a new president, things are toning down more and more and more as we go. And maybe I'm wrong, but it does seem like, because what was it? Facebook just ruled, which is kind of obnoxious, that people are allowed to now talk about what did you always call it? My Sharona virus,
originating in a toucan. It's so the fact that this doesn't offend people. Anyone who's not offended by this should be offended by their lack of offense at this. And I don't mean offense like, ooh, that's very offensive. It's shocking that we're old enough now to remember in the early stages of the My Sharona, you couldn't say the word. You could never discuss the fact that it might have been a leak from a lab. And now all of a sudden, a year later, after whatever damage has been exacerbated by virtue of people not being able to track that origin or to question that origin.
Debunked theory. That every time it was written about that debunked theory, debunked theory, and by the way, that's found.
And now it's coming out of Biden's mouth. Yeah, some credible evidence. The censorship may very well have exacerbated the problem, and people can justify their own suffering if it's in the interest of their political party. That is the definition of party over people. It's just it should be egregious and illustrate why censorship in the moment can be very, very destructive in the long run.
I had to have an argument with my wife about this, because I was saying, how I was saying the same thing you guys are saying. Look at this is a disaster. They were telling us this was a debunked theory. She's like, oh well, when you guys were saying it, there was really no evidence. Now they have evidence, and I said, and so my retort is that when you say something is debunked, you're saying we have evidence to the contrary to show that's not true, and what you're saying is false. If they would have said there's no evidence, but they're looking into it, that's different. The news media has been going around saying this is a conspiracy theory. And now they have credible evidence to say, well, this may not be a conspiracy theory. Now what it does, it calls into question when you tell us other things are debunked, right? It feeds into that, because this was not debunked. There was just not enough evidence to say, which way, one way or the other.
Good point. If they said unproven, I think you're right. If they said unproven theory, that would be completely different than debunked.
And they should.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, they choose the word debunked on purpose rather than unproven to make it, to basically shelve it as a taboo topic. Although this topic bothers me a lot less because I don't see how there's ramifications on American society the way, rather than another topic that they silence, the debunked, HCQ, which. Then the CDC comes out and says, well, maybe it is sort of helpful. But that's after MSM came out. How many people died potentially because they were basically ushered to stay away from HCQ because Trump, had once.
Well, Joe, that's the underlying. What was the benefit? What difference would it have made for Americans if this theory could have been explored properly a year ago? Well, politically, it would have been exploited by Trump, no question. This originating in a lab in China would have definitely been good for Trump's reelection. HCQ definitely would have been good for Trump. All this weaponizing it politically, if not necessarily for the effects on the pandemic, it had political ramifications. The Michigan Governor Whitmer and what we discovered with Cuomo and what Charlie LaDuff is discovering with Whitmer out of Michigan. What difference does it make if they died in a nursing home versus a hospital, or if it originated in a nursing home? When you're trying to control a pandemic, understanding the source is probably the most important thing if you're going to isolate people. And so if it turns out that the massive spread was originating due to state level corruption, incompetence, or whatever, the political ramifications are different. And to cover it up, it's egregious. It's egregious political corruption at its core that probably cost lots of people their lives.
I'm not questioning that it's politically corrupt or that it was, it was a serious issue in politics and that it had intentional. The whole ramifications were aimed at being political. What I'm talking, and yes, I agree with you, obviously, 100%. With respect to all of these issues, it was a matter of how can we get rid of Trump and how can we use this situation to make it and amplify any possible angle to use as a means of getting him removed from office. I'm talking about as far as American lives being affected by, how they're dealing with COVID. This is the extent that they went to. If you care about politics, how dirty are you going to get in politics? So if they're going to be so dirty in politics that they're going to say, well, this theory about how it originated, that's debunked, that's pretty bad. But to me, it's far more egregious when you're so dirty in your politics that you don't care about human life, that you're willing to basically claim that a potential remedy is debunked as being like witch doctor type of thing, which that potentially could cause countless people to die. That's a much dirtier level of politics, which is obscene. They're both awful. They're both ugly, but I think that's an obscene thing to actually, it's astonishing.
No,
somebody just super chatted, not just HCQ, but ivermectin or ivermectin, I don't know how to say it, is even more so. And
so
again,
it's just disgusting. Once you've seen it, it's not a question of red pill, black pill, blue pill, yellow pill. Once you've seen it, you can never unsee it, and you can never go back to looking at these people, the media, the politicians, the way you ever did. And which is why when people say, like, why would the government do this now? Like, you have to not appreciate it's always been like this to some degree or another. And once you fully appreciate it, you don't go back to being naive. But this has been from day one in terms of what they were censoring, what they were demonizing, all for political purposes, notwithstanding the fact that it was actively exacerbating the pandemic in the States and compromising the response, which itself was exacerbating other problems that were not related to the pandemic, but ancillary deaths. It's
well, hold on. Maybe I'm confused. The hiding of it from the whoever was hiding it, I'm assuming it's the Chinese, that obviously has a huge impact on the global, right, on the world. But that but I'm not sure if I'm understanding, how could Trump or the Trump administration have stopped them from trying to cover it up? Because they were actually looking into it too, right? I don't believe Trump had anything to do with the cover up from the what they were doing.
No, he didn't. It was the anti-Trump media that forbade discussion on this issue from the very beginning. It forbade the crowdsourcing of knowledge of the interwebs to go out and amongst itself find answers and dive into rabbit holes and to pull out rabbits, because they basically just poured cement into the rabbit holes and didn't allow the discussion on social media, on YouTube, on Facebook. I mean, it was a concerted effort. And it's just the amazing thing. It creates what AJ in his deposition called, his temporary psychosis. It creates the impression that whenever the media says something, the initial reflex, or whenever they ban something, whenever they say something, the initial reflex is to say there has to be truth in what they're banning and there has to be lies in what they're saying. And that's the bottom line. It wasn't Trump doing it. Trump was getting called racist for suggesting it originated in China.
And that's where I think the media, and this is where I think you get to the identity politics and all that, because they turned, I think the media, and this is one thing that I've always said about this particular issue. I think the media turned it into this identity politics. Now, if you say it came from China, you're a racist against Asian people, and the next thing you know, Asian hate crime is up, and that's Trump's fault, even though it's Democrats that are doing most of the crimes. It seems to me that at this day and age, the media has taken a really strong political opposition to one party, and I think this opposition to Trump was not only the media though. I think the drug companies had something to do with that too, because let's not forget, right after the election, next thing you know, we got 2 vaccines that are 90% effective that they had known about for weeks, but we weren't sure, so we're going to wait to after if Trump wins that election, that's a different story. But if they just imagine they had those rollouts 2 weeks before the election, we got 2 vaccines, 95% effective, ready to roll out. That's changing a lot of people's minds. So I think our politics are. I think politics are moved by a lot of things, but I think the media is the most corrupt out of all these processes. Though I agree with you with that, Viva.
I get a super chat asking this question, and I do think it's an interesting question. Would you take the argument that they didn't want to say this was even a possibility because it could increase anti-Asian hate? I
guess maybe I'm naive, but the only people who would translate a virus originating in China into Asian hate are probably people with that mentality to begin with and don't need that causation in the first place. There's no reasonable person is going to equate a virus coming out of communist China with hatred towards Asians in the world. No reasonable person. So if that's the rationale, I would argue that that rationale is ignorant on the one hand in that it equates all Asians with the Chinese government, which itself is the racist idea that it purports to want to combat. But I also think no reasonable person would come to that conclusion anyhow. And any person who would come to that conclusion doesn't need that as their basis to do so.
And they would actually, well, in furtherance of that justification, they would say, well, it is the alt-right. They're all a bunch of racists because anyone who does not agree with everything BLM ever said is alt-right. So they would say alt-right is filled with racists and they're crazy. And you're right, Viva, you need to have a predisposition, but all the Republicans have that predisposition. I don't know if they actually, I sometimes wonder whether they believe the narrative, that ridiculous narrative, or whether they, or whether they know themselves that this is just campaigning, and this is how we campaign, is just otherizing any of the Republicans. But
I got their super chat on it, and not the administration, the deep state, the administrative state, anyone nominally in the administrative branch that the president as head administrator can't instantly fire amounts to a fourth unaccountable branch. I agree that's true, and the term deep state to me is kind of like conspiracy theory. It is used to put a tinfoil hat on people using the term. You know, it's kind of a loaded term, but the truth is deep state is nothing more than an embedded bureaucracy. And you'll see it everywhere. At a university, you could say there's a deep state in the university. The people, secretary, you know, they've been there for 20 years. You can't do anything.
The media denied the idea of a deep state, my God, and called it a conspiracy theory from the beginning. A deep state is a nomenclature for what you're describing, Eric. But the media did the same thing with the idea of no, Donald Trump, there is no deep state. Bull crap. Everybody knows it. They just don't call it a deep state because they call it by a more politically correct term. One person's deep state is the other person's administrative state. So, but they debunked that theory also, the same way they debunked treatments, the same way they debunked origins, the same way they debunked.
Forget your quote marks. Debunked.
Yeah, the debunked is the biggest issue because the debunked,
I've been hearing. Well, I got distracted because I'm hearing a kid upstairs having an absolute meltdown, and I don't know what the situation is. But I may duck out a few minutes early.
Yeah, we'll wrap it up. So I'm going to put it all on Nate. He's going to tell us how to make the world correct.
Oh, trust me, if I knew that, I would be selling it. I wouldn't be giving it away for free on this stream. But I do want to say this though. For all the people who will watch this, you're going to disagree with us, right? We're all going to say things you're going to disagree with. But that's the part of reason why you keep coming back to watch us. It's because it's not about what we say. It's about our reasons behind why we say it. And that's the reason why we can all get together. We can all disagree because we attack each other's reasons. We don't attack each other as people. And going forward, that's hopefully more people would be that way.
Which I love. And I love having everybody here for just that reason, because this is fun. Everybody, goodlogic.locals.com. Also Good Logic on YouTube. Definitely subscribe to them.
Logic.
Joe, has your channel been monetized yet? Did you get to the 4,000 watch hours?
So this is what I was. Yes, 30. Okay, I sent in my request for approval. I was carried across that finish line by Nate, the lawyer. I don't know if you heard of him. There's a lawyer out there, Nate, who happens to have a very popular channel. I'm not sure how he gets popular. He thinks it's all himself. He never ever once credited any other human as helping him in that. But he did help. I'm kidding, because he's just constantly praising Viva for that. But he did carry me over the finish by bringing me on for the Chauvin closing arguments and live streaming that. And he was live streaming, and they switched over. He had to leave. So he's like, "Do you want to pick up the stream?" And I was like, "Hell yeah!" And I crossed that threshold. I doubled my hours in one day. The problem I'm having is I sent out my request for approval 35 days ago. They say I'm supposed to get an email back within 30 days. And I haven't heard word one from YouTube.
Don't be shy to try to get them on chat if you can. It's faster or slower depending on the channel and what they have.
How do I get them on chat?
You may not have the chat ability.
I could show you later, but in YouTube Studio there's a chat function, and also tag Team YouTube on Twitter.
It took
They're
me
pretty good. I mean, they're bots, but if you tag it's Team YouTube on Twitter and YouTube, you might get some responses.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Follow YouTube and tag them and say, "Hey, Team YouTube,
Yeah.
it's been 35 days. I was told 30. What's going on?" And sometimes that might.
On Twitter, you're saying.
Yeah, tag them on Twitter and then include a link to your channel.
Okay.
But it's not uncommon though. It takes some time because it took me some time too. I was waiting. I'm like, damn, it's taking me.
And especially depending on the type of content you already have, they might go through it with a finer tooth comb. On my second channel, Viva Family, the monetization was virtually instantaneous. I don't think there's any words that caught anything that required a further investigation. But no, they're pretty thorough on partnership approval.
Well, yeah, I picture Susan looking at my videos with her team, and they're just like.
Anton LaVey, I thought he died. That might be the problem. They're like, wait a minute, Anton LaVey? Oh God, he's got a channel now. I don't know if this is appropriate content.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, stay tuned for the vlog that I have coming out today is the lawsuit by the Daily Caller versus Lori Lightfoot. A very short 5-page judgment. It's like 10 meaningful paragraphs, but it should be entertaining. And we're going to talk about it Sunday night with Barnes. vivabarneslaw.locals.com. So we got Nate the lawyer. Everyone knows him. Not on Locals yet, but going to be there. Good Lawgic.
Goodlawgic.locals.com.
GIC. And then we got Eric Hunley.
Unstructured.locals.com.
Yeah, I can't change. I change it to erichunley.locals.com, but I don't know how I can do it. So it's like, whatever.
Live with the mistakes, because oftentimes the mistakes in the long run turn into benefits.
Viva, do me a favor, please, because I can't reach out to Barnes directly other than just Twitter thing. But I just want to appreciate. I know. I think it was mutually beneficial because I was probably the loudest voice supporting him from our circle here by making a video. So, but please express my gratitude for him getting my name out there.
And going back to what Nate said, you can even learn something from people you hate, and you can learn something from people who are wrong. But the bottom line. On the one hand, you can't. People are complex creatures. If your loyalty depends on full agreement of everything, it was never loyalty to begin with. It was actually only loyalty to yourself, so that they could say what you already believe to reaffirm your beliefs. So,
and we need and I'll always say we need more debate like what we saw earlier this week, and hopefully the ramifications, the fallout afterwards, that people can keep it about points and arguments and never make it like a personal vendetta type of thing. And that is how we have it.
If you see some of the comments on both Eric's video and Eric's stream and my stream, it's the internet. The comments always get personal, and this will fizzle out. The internet loves drama, and it loves, the drama explodes disproportionately. This will fizzle out, and people will move on to some other drama.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Well, everybody, thank you very much. And if everybody likes this kind of content, this happens from time to time, like every couple of weeks, quite often. Come. Subscribe to the channel, check it out. I get some